Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
We're back for another bonus episode, and this time we've got a special guest today, and we are very excited to be talking to him. We read his debut novel for our episode last month, Dear Monica. Please welcome Samuel Davel.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me.
Did we say your name right, Samuel?
It's Davel, but I'm so
Davel.
Everybody's always like Davel. I'm so used to it at this point. However it comes out, it comes out. It's no big deal.
I thought that as I read it, I was like, damn it, I didn't ask him how to say his last name.
No,
do you go by Sam or Samuel?
Either is totally cool with me as long as it's not Sammy.
Oh, okay.
We can handle that. All right. So, Sam, if you want to go ahead and say hi to everybody and introduce yourself real quick, we'll...
Sure. I'm Sam Davel. I'm an author, an actor. I do a couple different things. I started writing pretty much when the pandemic started, kind of as a creative outlet. Acting was kind of put on hold, and like a lot of other artists at the time, I kind of found myself lacking drive or intention. And so for a while, I was just kind of floating through the pandemic, hoping that it was going to end, 2 weeks and it'll be fine. And then 6 months later, it's a little tough. But I like to write kind of with a mental health edge to it. I haven't had necessarily the easiest or the hardest life, but I've had a mental health heavy, conscious life. And I like to write about that. And I like to write about from stuff that I've experienced or stuff that I've lived, because I feel like that's kind of the truth of the nature and truth of what I'm writing. There's obviously twists in there and fiction applied, but I like to write in the realm of reality, and with stories that could be true or potentially are true with different names or slightly different circumstances. And I do kind of like to write with a romance side. I am a little bit of a hopeless romantic and grew up on the rom-coms and all of that stuff. So I do have that bone in me, and that's something that I like to write about and I enjoy writing about.
My guy.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And a lot of that stuff definitely came out in the book too. So, mind you that this is going to be a spoiler-free part of it. What would you, if you could explain in a few words, give us like a brief synopsis of Dear Monica?
I would say it just chronicles the main character Charlie's life after Monica leaves him, how he deals with them separating, her being gone out of his life. I like to use the analogy, she was his Swiss Army knife. She was his best friend. She was his wife. She was his therapist at times. She was the person that he went and got pizza with, and then the person that he dressed up with, went downtown and had 3 glasses of wine with. So how does he live afterwards, losing his Swiss Army knife from his life? And what does he do? What is his life like afterwards? How does he deal with her being gone? Is she around? Is she not around? And kind of where that plays into his mental health. At the same time, chronicles their relationship and what they had together.
Yeah, I mean, and before we jump in too much, I did want to thank you. And I did mention this on the podcast that we did about the book, but also just, I feel like the mental health writing from a realistic standpoint doesn't happen very often. And so I really appreciated it as a mental health practitioner, like reading a novel that had such realism and just touched on some really important issues. And so I just think that that's awesome.
Thank you for that. I think it's important to write, about reality and write about realism, because these are true. People go through this. People, life is awesome and life is a ton of fun and it's glorious and it's sunshine. And then it's also these horrible moments, and it's also, dark, rainy days. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of the things we talked about in the episode over your book too is that was Dear Monica fun to read at times? No. Was it an important conversation, an important thing to read? Absolutely. So yeah, that was a great way to describe that.
At times it was really difficult to write too. So
I believe that. Yeah. So like our normal episodes, guys, we're going to split this interview into 2 sections, a spoiler-free section at the first and then a spoiler-filled section after that. So if you're wanting to still read Dear Monica, you can listen to the first half of the episode safely. We'll avoid spoilers as best we can. So our first question for you today, Sam, is I think Barbara's going to ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I know you said that you started writing during the pandemic, but did you ever before that consider writing anytime before then, or was it just this hit and you're like, you know what, let me try this?
No, I've written before. I just never had, I guess, the drive and the intention of doing anything with it. Actually, my mom my mom went to prison when I was in seventh grade, and I started a novel, or maybe sixth grade. I started a novel, like a self reflection journal. That titled it like Hell and Back as a sixth grader, and wrote journaling the whole time that she was gone. And then she came back and life was normal and it was good. And I was like, I have this super dramatic, weird sixth grade, like 12 or 13-year-old journal. And I ended up getting rid of it and tossing it. But that was the first time that I really like wrote something and had it out there. And then I've written scripts before, and I've written shorts and stuff like that, with acting and monologues and that kind of stuff. And I've written a lot of letters. I like to kind of send letters to friends or family and people that I care about. And so I've done that kind of stuff and written them kind of from a fictional side, or more of like a dramatized side. But so I have done that stuff before, but as far as sitting down to actually write and publish and write something with the intent of other people reading it, the vast majority, hopefully, reading it, I've never really done that.
All right, Lauren, I think you've got a question as well.
Yes. So, do you have a favorite author, or like, are there any authors that you were particularly inspired by?
Yes, I am a huge F. Scott Fitzgerald fan. His metaphors through talking about love and people and life, it's a different level of writing for me. And anytime I find myself reading even just synopsises or phrases that he's written, it's just like this guy was on a different level with imagery and the way that he makes you feel from his writing. He's definitely probably my favorite author. Um, and recently I've been into thrillers, and I just finished Alex North's last novel, Whispering Man. That was a really good book too. That was a really good one. I like the way that he writes, kind of from a mystery side, where it keeps you intrigued, and there's a lot of questions the whole time that you're reading through that keeps you going.
Oh, that's cool. I'm not familiar with that book. I'll have to check that out. I read a lot of thrillers too, so that sounds interesting. Um, I know you said this is the first book that you wrote, or first book you published, I guess, during the pandemic. Do you have any plans for more, or have you already started writing something else?
Yeah,
Anything you can share?
I do actually. I have one more that's finished, and then another one that's probably three-fourths of the way done. I actually was probably, I probably would have published the second one now. But honestly, after listening to your guys' podcast the first time through, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to hire an additional editor for this second one before it comes out, have them go through it one last time, another time, another pair of eyes, before we publish through and see what happens with that. But I do have one more it's written. It's another one that's in letter form. Um, it's about a soldier who deploys, goes to Afghanistan, leaves his wife and child behind, and they kind of deal with the consequences of him being gone for a year, and what he's seeing and what the wife is dealing with at home, while still trying to keep their marriage and their romance and that spark there. And then the second one that I have written, it's regular book form, I guess you would call it. I don't know what you would typically call it, but yeah, regular book form. It's kind of
I like that. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of a COVID romance story, that I'm about three-fourths of the way through, and I'm really, really happy with it.
Nice. Well, hopefully we get the chance to read your future works. I know we talked in our episode that if you ever write anything in the future, we definitely want to read them. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and those both sound really interesting too. So thanks for sharing a little bit about what they are.
Can you kind of give us a hint, like how is your writing process like, or how does that look for you day to day?
Yeah, I have an extremely chaotic writing process, I would say. It's very like I pretty much just like throw up on the page, and then I go back through and edit through, and like I'll literally get 12 pages down the line and then be like, you know what, actually I hate all of this. I'm gonna go back to this, delete, and then come back through. very rarely have any sort of plan. I just have the story in my head and I'm like, you know what, this is where I want to go with it. And then I always tell people that like I feel like the stories a lot of times they have their own path and their own journey once you start to write them. And if you're open to that and allow yourself to hear that, you like the story takes itself. A lot of the stuff necessarily like you don't necessarily have to plan because it's like this happens and then this happens and this happens. Oh, and then I've got an idea for this and then this happens. Then you know what? I've got to this point. Oh, you know what? This should have happened here. I'm going to go back and put this in. And it's like the story kind of takes you on this own journey while you write it. And I find that that's really fun and interesting. And I enjoy writing that way because it's like the story's telling itself to me as I write it. And so it's fun to write that way. And it's kind of eye opening rather than, oh, I know what chapter one's going to be about. I've, outlined chapter two. I've outlined chapter three. It's a lot more difficult. I spend a lot of time staring at a computer screen. But when something comes to and an avenue opens up, it's a lot of fun and it's totally eye opening. And there's been times where an avenue opens up and all of a sudden it's 3 hours later and there's 30 pages done. And then, the next day I open up my computer and 3 hours go by and I have 7 words written. Or I'll write 7 pages and then go back and read through it and I'm like, this is junk. This is trash. Delete, start over. My writing style is very chaotic and really it's just a lot of throwing up on the page and seeing what sticks.
Nice. Well, when you're writing or when you're coming up with ideas, what comes first to you? Is it like the plot or more the characters?
Usually the plot. Usually the main idea of the plot comes first. With Dear Monica, I knew where I wanted the story to go and I knew kind of what I wanted it to look like. But I guess like the individual stops that came to me while I was writing. So I kind of had, I guess, an idea of where I wanted to start, where I wanted the middle to be in the end, and everything in between just came throughout the process of writing it. And a lot of it just happened honestly by chance and randomness, and it was fun.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Sam. Before we wrap this section up, can you let our listeners know where they can get a copy of Dear Monica and where they can find you on social media?
Yes, so you can get a copy of Dear Monica on Barnes & Noble or Amazon. Just search either Dear Monica. It's there. It's actually cheaper than most books in the genre. And you can find me on Instagram at Sam Davel.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we want to make sure we got you got a plug in there for that. Let's give you a second there too. But moving on from here, remember the second part of this podcast is going to include some huge spoilers. When we're talking about this book, some really big spoilers. So if you do want to read Dear Monica, stop listening now, come back and listen to the rest of the interview when you're done.
This is Leah Stuhler, creator and host of YA Book Chat podcast. If you love reading young adult books and chatting about them with your friends, then head on over to my podcast and take a listen. Each episode, my guest and I chat about a different YA book. We start spoiler-free and then head into our spoiler section where we dive into the mysteries of each book. And we do it with laughs and fun along the way. You can listen to YA Book Chat on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcast. And now, back to the show.
But for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go.
Before we move on, we would like to issue a trigger warning for the following themes: mental health problems, pregnancy and infant loss, suicide, substance abuse, and terminal illness.
Thank you, Lauren. So the first question we've got here is it's actually not even a spoiler question, but how long did it take you to write Dear Monica?
It probably took me, honestly, I had the idea for it for probably about 6 months. I want to write a story from the standpoint of letters, and kind of from a journal standpoint. And once COVID hit, I didn't do much but like hang out on my couch and watch Netflix for a while. And then after a while, when I was like, why haven't I done this yet? I have so much time on my hands. I could do this. And I sat down to actually write it. It really only took maybe 3 to 4 weeks of about 3 to 4, maybe 5 hours a day of writing. And luckily, I was in a position where, I'm an actor. I'm out of work. Obviously, I have the time to commit to that. And so it was probably 3 to 4 weeks before I had the first rough draft done. And then
Okay.
from there, I edited probably about 5 times, sent it out to an editor who had it for about 2 weeks, and then another editor for about 2 weeks. And then I edited one more time. So altogether, probably about 3.5, 4 months from start to publication.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. So speaking of what you just mentioned about the letter journal format that you did, I know in our episode we talked about, at least for me, when I noticed that it was in that format, I was like, oh, it's kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, I loved it. It was awesome. The way that you did it was really cool. It was a really fun way to read a story. What made you decide to write the story in that format? What made you go to the journal or the letter way?
Actually, I was my girlfriend left for Christmas last year, and I stayed in New York, and I sent her like 2 or 3 letters so that she would have them when she came back to her New York address, and I started them out extremely dramatic, like New York's an awful lot more gray when you're not around, and stuff like this. And I like wrote these letters, and I was like, I read through them afterwards, and I was like, these are actually kind of cool. This is kind of a different standpoint. This is kind of cool. And I was thinking about it, and it kind of hit me. And I knew that I wanted to write a story like Dear Monica, with the kind of plot and the kind of progression and stuff like that. And I was like, this would be a really interesting way. And honestly, to write a first book this way, it's a lot easier because you don't have all of the fine, minute plot detail points and character points. You're kind of just thrown right into somebody's journal in somebody's world where you don't necessarily have to create the world around before the story starts. The reader's just boom in it, really intimate, really, really open right away. So honestly, I was like, this will probably be easier to write a book this way than to do it the regular way. And so that's kind of how it all started. Is I kind of jumped into it that way, and then once I got into it, it presented its own problems trying to write a story this way. But that's how it all started off. Was me writing her letters and thinking this would be a really interesting way to write a book, especially about the kind of the side effects of mental health and some of the stuff that Charlie was going through with the real intimate and kind of the not wanting to talk about, but still talking about stuff. Because one of the things that I was struggling with before I started writing was, how do I show what Charlie's struggling with without him telling another character? Because the reality is if he's going through depression and anxiety and some alcoholism and stuff like that, he's probably not going to go to his best friend and be like, oh, dude, I blacked out last night and woke up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He's going to be like, dude, you're an adult, you have a job. What are you doing? Like, that's psychotic. Well, how do I come across and get the reader to understand what he's going through without making it believable? And that's kind of how I sat on the letter idea.
It was definitely effective. We felt like it was super intimate and just very intentional. And I've read stories in letter format before, but I don't know if either of you guys had, Michael and Barbara.
No, this is my first one.
Yeah, first one.
Yeah, so it's one of I like that format. It also makes it, the pace is easier that way, because you just want to keep, okay, just one more letter. Oh, it's 2 a.m. Oh, just one more letter. And I just kept reading.
And that's how writing it was too, was a lot of times I'd find myself writing late at night because it was easier. And I'd be like, I could probably get one more in. One more is a page and a half? I could write one more. It's fine. So it's the same way writing it.
I think with that it was cool to see because it turned into more like an unreliable source because you were hearing Charlie's point of view, but he was also hiding some facts. Mm-hmm. So because of that, we were arguing or trying to figure out, did you intentionally drop hints for readers to pick up on the fact that Monica didn't actually break up with him, but was actually in fact dead? Or was that something that just came naturally while in the process of you writing it?
No, I definitely did drop some hints, and that was on purpose. I think like I knew going into it that the reader is probably going to either one get really annoyed and be like, "This is stupid. I'm done reading about this. I don't care why I don't care why Monica left. She did, whatever. I'm over it." Or they were going to do the opposite of like, "Well, what happened? Was she murdered? Did she leave? Was Charlie turn into a total psychopath and try to like stalk her and go into like, you from Netflix and keep her in a cage? Like, what really happened?" And so I knew that going into it, I was going to have to kind of play with what was going on to keep the reader interested. Otherwise, if I'm reading it, I'm like, you know what? At this point, I don't care anymore. She's gone, dude. Like, whatever happened, happened. Like, get over it. So I definitely did play with it a little bit, and a lot of the stuff with like her family and the friends and stuff like that. Like, I wanted the reader to be like, did she just pick everything up and leave? Like, did she like, what is going on here? Like, where in the world is she? And then towards the end, when there's only a few pages left, it's like she's still gone, and it's like eventually what pretty much is going to happen.
Yeah, I feel like I went through every single emotion that you just described, and it was definitely a roller coaster. And then I was just gutted at the end. Like, I was just so sad for him. But I was so annoyed at him for like the whole first half of the book. And then I was convinced that she was murdered because I am like a crime fiction guru. And so, yeah, I went through all of the things. So you were definitely effective in in all of that.
Yeah, that was very well written because I also felt the same way. At first, I was like, oh man, he's just one of those guys that just won't get over the fact. And like, you feel kind of bad. And then he keeps going. You're like, okay, come on. And then like the hints really came down. I'm like, there's something weird going on. Yeah. He's not telling me the whole truth. Like he's becoming unreliable now. But I want to keep reading to see where is he going with this. So I think you did a really good job with that for sure.
I wanted Charlie to continue to get a little bit, more and more kind of chaotic with trying to figure out where she is and like what's going on with her. Like at one point he's in Thailand and it's like, dude, what are you doing in Thailand, bro? Like, why are you there? Like, what in the world is going on? So like that was something that I wanted to do where it's like, you can see him getting more and more like to this breaking point. And hopefully that came through.
It definitely did. Yeah, the spiral, and then at the moment I was like, wait, hold on, is she dead? Like that. It's like, is she dead? I remember talking to Barbara about that. Like it's like she was ahead of me in the book at the time. I was like, is she dead? She wouldn't tell me, obviously, but yeah, no, you did a really good job with the hints. It made him seem whiny at first, but then you started picking up on a couple of those, and it's like, what's happening here?
No, he's very whiny. He's if he's your friend, like you have such a hard time with him because you're like, dude, like come on, man. Like things happen, and I totally get it, but come on. And that was the thing that I wanted to get through because that's such a parallel to life. Like my mom went through suicide, and that was a huge thing for all of us. It's like, come on, like it's not that bad. You have all of this stuff to look at. It's fine. I don't understand it. This is getting obnoxious. Blah 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 blah. And that's the reality of the situation. That's literally what everyone goes through because you don't understand it if you're not them and in their world.
Yeah, that's very true. Moving on from that is mental health is obviously a huge theme in Dear Monica. Why did you think that the topic of mental health was so important to include in your book?
I think actually for me, a lot of the writing was therapeutic. Having gone through what my mom went through and being on that journey. Sorry, my cat's so annoying right now. And being on that journey with her, I asked myself after she committed suicide, like how did I not do more? How did I not see this coming? Like all of the signs were there. This always happens, blah, 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 like whatever you want to tell yourself. And like writing this, it was really therapeutic because it's like everyone feels the same way. Everyone gets it. Everyone's in that same boat. And it's if you're not the person going through it and you're not the exact person having those thoughts, you don't get it at all. And so that's what I wanted for Charlie, and that's what I wanted to understand too. And so this was really therapeutic for me in getting a lot of my feelings out there and kind of coming to terms with my own suicidal story, my own family's suicidal story, not my own personal one.
Yeah, so I think that we talked about it in the podcast that we did over your book, but I picked up on the parallels there too, as far as just the character of Charlie going through and just people reacting to him in an intentional way, that it was written that people would be annoyed just like they are with people who don't understand. And so I think that's awesome that you were able to write this and that it was therapeutic for you from your own experiences. It's just super important. What was the hardest scene for you to write, do you think?
This is a tough one. I think, honestly, I think the first one was the toughest from like a story standpoint because I had a really hard time trying to figure out how to start the story and get into why Charlie's writing these letters and what the point of them is. I probably wrote 15 to 20 different first letters, trying to figure out why is this guy writing letters to this woman who left him and not tell the audience that she's dead. You know, like that's really tough to do, and I did finally do it. But I think the toughest one for me um, was probably the last one. That's a really tough one, um, especially because like I act, and so a lot of the time when I write, I use kind of a lot of the same acting techniques, and one of them is kind of like substitution or parallels. So I kind of try to put myself in the mindset of the characters at the same time. And so that last one was really challenging and really frightening to write and heavy, and it felt heavy beforehand, even getting into it. I knew that I was going to have to write it, and I put it off for a couple of days, and then finally one night was like, okay, tonight's going to be the night. I'm gonna write this one. Let's get into it. Let's do it. And just having to write that stuff on paper and understanding that this is a guy that I've gone on a huge trip with and a huge journey with to make this story, and this is the end of him. And part of it was kind of beautiful at the same time because he is being reunited with the person who he wants to be. Also, all of his family and friends, and being on the opposite side of that, how they're going to feel and they're going to react to it. And that's a really tough moment. And putting myself in his shoes where he's at his breaking point and he's ready to do what he did. It was really tough and it was really heavy. Then the epilogue at the end was pretty challenging too, just from a personal standpoint. There was a couple more through there. Like I probably cried 6 or 7 times writing it.
Me too.
But it was, and especially knowing like writing it, I knew how it was going to end. So there were definitely scenes or letters that I would write, and they would get to me because I know what's coming at the end. And it was good because I was like, this is going to be good and this is going to be powerful. But then at the same time, I was like, all right, I got to put this computer down and take a break for a little bit because that was rough.
I can imagine just with how heavy it was to read. I can't even imagine how heavy that would be to write and have, that personal side too.
So I know you talked about your like the process you used to get into sorry, Barbara, to get into the like the mindset of Charlie.
I was going to compliment him and you cut me off.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so I've only ever cried on one book, and I was a lot younger when I did. And after reading that was the first time that I've cried in a really long time. And I just wanted to compliment you on that because I'm pretty, like, I like to I love to read, but I try to take myself off of that so I don't get super invested in stuff. But man, that last letter, it was just gut wrenching and just like a punch in the gut and all of the emotions. And then the epilogue that you wrote just really brought it home. And I remember I was finishing reading it in bed and I rolled over so Michael couldn't see, because I was like, must not show what happened in the book so I don't spoil it for him. So I just like casually rolled over and I'm like, it's a great book. Yeah, you're gonna really like that. And he's like, what is wrong with you? I was like, nothing. So I just want to applaud you on that, because that's 2 books now that have made me cry. And the other one was Harry Potter when I was really young. So that I feel like that doesn't even count, because like when you're young, you cry over everything. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
While we're on that topic, I don't think I've ever cried during a book, Sam. And I work from home. I'm actually sitting at the desk I work at, and I sat here after reading those 2 chapters, and I just wept at my desk. Like it was like a gut punch. So it was, and that actually leads into the question I wanted to ask too, which is, I think what made Charlie feel so real was the process you just described of how you used that same acting techniques to get into the character before you wrote the letters. And I know you said that obviously can be heavy depending on which letter you were writing. Do you have a process that you use to pull yourself back out of the character at the end when you're done writing, when you're done being Charlie?
Yeah, I'll either like go for a walk or like pet my cat or something like that, where I'm like, Charlie's world is Charlie's world, and I've got my world, and I've got to do something at the end of it to pretty much pull me back into my world. Like that's the reality of the situation. Usually I can kind of pick things up and drop them from an acting standpoint. I've only had a couple times in a few roles where I've really like had something kind of latch onto me and stick, especially something heavy. But for the most part, it's usually just about understanding that like that's that world, and doing something that's not in that world to bring you back out of it. So maybe it's calling my sister, talking to my sister, calling my girlfriend, talking to her, calling my dad, having a conversation with somebody that's makes you realize that like that is it's real, and the emotions are real and the thoughts are real, but it is also make believe, and it is also pretend. And it's not actually your world. So that's usually what I would do. If I was writing real late at night, honestly, most of the time I'd just kind of go to bed and then wake up, and I wake up in my bed, my bedroom, and that's kind of how I pulled myself out of it and stayed out of it.
So I don't know if I'm the only weirdo that does this, but like when I'm reading things, I like to act out scenes sometimes just to see it in my brain. As an actor, did that help you write that so you can like actually see the scene? So because you did describe things really well, and I enjoyed that. Like there is one scene in particular where I believe Charlie was laying in bed, and you described like the sun filtering through the window and hitting Monica, and like he just kind of described that. Like, is that something you like to use just for acting purposes? If that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm kind of a script junkie when it comes to acting. So I'm heavy on the script and what's kind of supposed to go through the script, and what story is supposed to be told to the audience from the script. And a lot of the story that's told is also through it. I do a lot of film, so through the picture that's on screen. And so a lot of times when I write, I'm seeing that picture from what the audience is going to see. And I'm like, how do I get this picture to show them what I want to show them? That's what I need to write about. And that's something that I think about often in acting is, what is the audience supposed to be learning from this scene? Or what is the intention of this scene? What is this supposed to do for the story? Okay, that's what we need to bring through. How does that come through? Now we need to figure that out. And that was a little bit easier writing a story, because it's, well, what is the intention? What is the audience supposed to learn about this scene? That's what I need to write. And that was, there wasn't the, let me figure out how to act that. It was just, let me figure out how to write that. So I do often writing times, I do, see it in my head and see the picture and see it almost as like a movie as I write it out.
So I know that you said that you knew where you wanted the book to end, does that mean you already had like a definite idea of exactly, or did you kind of like toy around with a few things before being like, no, this is it, this is how I wanted it to end?
No, I toyed around a lot with the story leading up to the end. I knew that I wanted to write a story from letter standpoint, with the last letter being a suicide letter. I knew that I wanted that. But as far as like leading up to that, like I didn't necessarily think about how. I knew that I wanted Monica to have passed and to be gone and not in this world anymore. I didn't know how I wanted that. I didn't know, the stillbirth didn't really come to me until probably about halfway through the writing process. A lot of that stuff like kind of came and went and was the journey. But I knew that I wanted a story from letters, and I knew that I wanted the last letter to be a suicide letter. What he wrote on it and what he wrote about, I didn't have any idea of that. But I knew, like I said, I knew where I knew where I wanted it to end. How I wanted it to end, I wasn't completely sure on that.
Did you ever toy with the idea of maybe including Monica's point of view, or like a letter from her side, or was it always strictly just Charlie so we could really be surprised?
No, I definitely did. I had written out actually a couple of letters from like her dad and from her sister. I thought about including at the end kind of a letter from Monica to Charlie, kind of like asking him to move on and explaining kind of what happened. But I had trouble kind of implementing that into the story with it still flowing well. Especially with writing from other characters' standpoints, it was really challenging to kind of keep the audience on or keep the reader on their toes and not give away what happened. If I felt like if I wrote from anybody else's standpoint, the ending was going to come out. It was really challenging to write a letter from her sister or from her dad and not talk about her passing, or even write a letter from her and not talk about her being gone or something along those lines. And so I felt like from Charlie's standpoint, the story flowed the best and had the best pace to it, and it just made the most sense. I definitely played around with that a lot, but at the end, it just made more sense story wise to keep it all from his perspective. And I think mental health wise, it was a lot more powerful to kind of keep it all from his perspective, and it made the payoff, if you want to call it a payoff, at the end, more bigger.
Did you intentionally, because I feel like my perception was that it was kind of written from Charlie's perspective, and he kind of had that tunnel vision of Monica and just kind of that unhealthy, all those mental health struggles. So we didn't learn a whole lot about Charlie's family. Mm-hmm. Was that intentional as far as just that he was so far removed from his support systems?
Yeah, that was pretty intentional. I wanted it to be like very, it's it's like obviously Charlie paints Monica as this like perfect human. She's so amazing. She's flawless, and it's like nobody's ever like that. That's not real. That's not how people are. Everybody has their flaws. Every relationship has fights. Every relationship has problems. But I wanted it as like he has gone through so much and lost so much of himself that he's just made her to be this perfect human for him. And at the end of the day, nobody else is ever going to replace the spots that she was in his life. And I wanted that on purpose, to show the gravity of what people go through, and the reality of people's loss and their grief. I kind of had Charlie as this idea of kind of like a floater and somebody who didn't necessarily have much before her, didn't have a lot of base, didn't have a strong family, and then kind of latched onto her. And she became his home, his family, and then she unfortunately passed and left. And it was the first time that he had ever had that, and he didn't know how to get it again. He didn't know he didn't know what to do without it because he had it for a time now. And that was kind of the idea. Obviously, Monica's not perfect and she's not flawless. He was so caught up in the loss of her and the idea of not understanding what you have until you lose it, that for him in those moments after her passing, that she was for him.
Which is a super common phenomenon for people that are dealing with grief. So I thought that was really well done too. We do have our final question, I think, from Barbara.
For our final question, we wanted to give you the chance to partake in our Badass Character Award that we always do, except for your episode, because we thought that probably would be a little weird to be like, here's a Badass Character Award, Charlie, so we had to skip on that one. But so we normally pick who the most badass character is for each of us in the book that we're reading. And we just wanted to put a little fun spin on this. So we want to ask you a similar question, but obviously not for your own book. So who would you consider the most badass character from any book you've ever read and why?
Ove, from a man called Ove. He's just
I love that
awesome.
book.
Yeah, he's just so awesome and cool, and he learns so much about life throughout the whole story. And it's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of a parallel with Charlie, except for it goes in the opposite direction. Fortunate for him, unfortunate for Charlie. But he just, he keeps going through life and learning these moments, and that's just such a fun book, and it's awesome, amazingly written, and it's a good read. It's funny, it's cute, it's sad, it's like everything in between, and he's just a total badass. He's awesome. He's also just hilarious. He's such a character.
I love that one. We were literally just talking about that book like last night, and I was telling them that they need to read it because I really enjoyed that book. He is a badass.
It's such a good one. It's a great book, and it's another easy read. You get lost in it, and then you're 70 pages deep, and you're like, oh, what happened the last hour?
Yes, it definitely is. Well, we really appreciate you joining us on the pod. Before we wrap this up, can you let our listeners know one more time where they can get a copy of your book, Dear Monica, and where they can find you on social media?
Yes, you can find Dear Monica on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and you can find me on Instagram at Sam Davel. And then I just want to say one more time, thank you guys so much again for inviting me on here, and also, reading my novel and talking about it, and honestly just being really awesome people. I really appreciate it.
Well, we will definitely keep an eye out for your next book to add to our list because we really enjoyed the first one, and so we really appreciate you coming on and providing us with copies of your novel and just the opportunity to do this.
I did want to mention, I thought this was the best written mental health perspective because you can really tell that you're writing from a perspective that you've at least experienced it, not maybe you personally, but someone close to you. Because I feel like that's a lot what's lacking in certain books nowadays, where they try to write about mental health or anything like that, and it just comes off not very sincere. And I think you've done the best job that I've written. Like you could really feel what Charlie was feeling. It was very palpable at times, and you could tell throughout the letters how he was spiraling further and further, and how he was keeping that from his friends by saying, like, oh yeah, I told her I was doing okay, like this is really what I want. It was just I thought you did a very good job. So it was really interesting to read that, and I think it's a very important thing for people to realize, that you telling your friends, like, oh, get over yourself, it's fine, you'll find someone else. Like, we don't realize we do that to people until it's a little too late. And I think you did a good job of describing that in the book, or at least showing that in the book. So
thank you so much for that.
I agree, and nobody makes Barbara cry, so
it's true. It's true, and you got me there.
Yeah, I didn't even know that happened, the whole rollover.
I did want you to, because I was like, if I start crying, you're going to know something bad happened in the book, and I didn't want to spoil it, because I hate saying such a good ending, because obviously that's not what you want to happen to Charlie, but it was such an important ending. So I was really trying not to spoil it. So, yep, I'm glad I rolled over and pretended to cough. It was like nothing's happening.
But Sam, thanks so much for coming on. We loved reading your book and talking about it, and it was awesome that you agreed to come on and talk to us too. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and let us know when your next one comes out, because I'm very interested to read more from you and support you in your endeavors as well.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much.